We're joined now on Zoom by Michael Curry. Michael's the CEO of the Mass League of Community Health Centers on the board of the National NAACP. Also on the line with Michael is Leslie Redmond. Leslie is the former president of the Minneapolis NAACP. She's been on the ground in Minneapolis observing and organizing as federal agents have descended on the city. Michael, good to see you. Leslie, good to
Good,
meet you. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
good to see you
Thank
both.
Yeah, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us. So give us a sense of what you've been seeing out in Minneapolis.
Yeah, so first, whenever Michael Curry calls me, I always make myself available.
Of
Um,
course.
So do
Minnesota,
we, by the way. We do too, but go ahead.
um, Minnesota is really, it's a mix, right? On one sense, it's disheartening, right? I was at the visual last night and I said, I'm so tired of coming to visuals and memorials of people that should still be alive. When I saw what happened to Alex, it made me think about 2015 when Jamar Clark, an unarmed black man, was killed in North Minneapolis while he was laying on the ground. When I saw Renee Nicole Good be killed in her car, it made me think about Philando Castile, who was killed in his car in 2016 here in Minnesota. And so while what the nation is watching seems unprecedented, unfortunately, the black community has been experiencing it for far too long. But the part that I'll tell you that is encouraging is that, yesterday I went to my church service and it was heavy, but it was also hopeful. Then I went to Powwow, which is a local business with Indigenous brothers and sisters that's organizing resources and supporting the community and mobilizing. Then I went to a general strike meeting where people were organizing and talking about the success of the Friday strike, but how the very next morning Alex was killed in daylight, right? Which feels like a retaliation to the success of the strike and the demonstration that happened on Friday. And then I went over and was a part of a demonstration that was happening downtown. And then I held space at a local business because the local businesses are really struggling as well. And that's something that I tell people is we don't want unintended consequences to be local businesses are going out of business because they still have to pay the electricity. They still have to pay for their leasing. And so what I'm doing with my nonprofit is we're actually holding space. And so we're paying them for the space, we're paying them for the food. I'm facilitating conversations. We have Indigenous brothers and sisters, white, black, Asian, Somali brothers and sisters all gathering together to come and share space. And so there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of despair at the same time.
Leslie, we're talking to Leslie Redmond, who's the former president of the Minneapolis NAACP. Michael Curry will join the conversation in a second here. There was a lot of conversation on our show about this strike, this general strike in Minneapolis, Minnesota on Friday. And there's been a lot of talk on this show, and I know elsewhere, about it spreading beyond the borders of the city. How did that all come together? How was that organized? How did it happen?
So you all know we have a long history of labor and organizing and Paul Wellstone and so many others who helped to really lay the foundation. And so we really are Minnesota strong and labor organizations came together and community. And, one of the things that I mentioned at the labor meeting yesterday is I would like to see more representation of more diverse audiences, but not to distract from really the success that's been done and that we are all in this together and we all want ICE out of Minnesota and we all want our community to be safe and secure. And I will tell you, I think we definitely should be expecting more strikes. The local businesses are really in support of the strikes. They don't want to see American citizens dying in broad daylight either. And I'll tell you, all the corporations, because you all may know, Minnesota has more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other state, right? And so we have a lot of corporations here, and they finally released a statement of like 60 of them, and it was underwhelming. It was nothing to write home about. And they really were talking about how they didn't want to, lose more money. That's what I heard when I saw it. That's what I was feeling, right? And so the community is saying, you all are not standing with us. We're going to remember this, and we're not going to stand with you all. And so I think that we're going to see a lot more coming.
Michael, you were out in Minnesota, Minneapolis in November. What were you doing there and what did you think?
Well, first and foremost, Leslie, and I have to say this because I'm glad that Leslie was available this morning. If you were watching in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and you watch activists rise to the fore to speak on behalf of the community, Leslie was one of those. Like if you Google Leslie Redmond, you'll see her speaking truth to power. It's interesting that we're here again many years later, and she's still doing the same thing she is. And I just want to say this for all those folks who want to be hopeful. We have leaders that courage did not skip this generation, like Leslie Redmond, a young woman who is speaking, fighting, standing up, and she is quite frankly risking her life in Minneapolis, St. Paul right now. So Leslie, just for me to you as your big brother, I'm just so proud of you for that you're doing that work. I was there visiting on a community health center conference, but we made it a point while we were there, a movement born out of the civil rights movement, to go by and visit the square, to sit. I literally stood for about 2 hours and talked, Leslie, to local residents. I went and spent time with my college professor, Mahmoud El-Khati, who, for all of us in Massachusetts who may not know his name, he is probably the equivalent of Mel King in a Massachusetts perspective, but he's a historian like a Byron Rushing. This man was my college professor, so I got to get the on-the-ground description of what happened during George Floyd's murder, but what's happened since the murder and what's happened in that community. But I have Leslie also on the ground to keep me updated. I'd say this, right now, we are, Leslie, I tell Jim and Marjorie all the time, we're getting weathered to what we're seeing on television. People are now it's becoming normalized to see occupation in U.S. cities. It's becoming normalized to see an officer with his gun drawn to the head of a citizen. And I know the country was weathered to this when it was Black folks. When they could turn on their television, they go, oh, well, that stuff happens. Maybe they shouldn't have pulled out their wallet. Maybe they did have a gun. Maybe they shouldn't have run. But what does it happen that now you turn on your television and you see white citizens now being murdered? Last but not least, Marjorie, the contradiction. The Department of Justice, when they looked at the Minneapolis Police Department, had a scathing report about abuses by Minneapolis police, Leslie. And it was all the same stuff. People couldn't pull out their phone because the police would go after you, harass you, arrest you. They were brutally attacking people. They were jumping in front of cars in order to have a justified shooting, to shoot into cars. And here, lo and behold, now the federal government is now in Minneapolis doing the same exact things that the Department of Justice found the local police department doing. This is ironic to me that we're here having this conversation, but my message is what I share with Leslie. We all need to make sure that we don't go back to sleep. We need to be conscious and watching and paying attention to what's happening in Minneapolis, because we need to show up in Boston for Minneapolis. We need to show up across Massachusetts for Minneapolis, because dare we watch and ignore this, because it eventually will come here as well.
That's the voice of Michael Curry, who's on the national board of the NAACP, and he is talking about Leslie Redmond, who's also with us, former president of the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP. Sorry, Marjorie.
I was just going to say, to underscore what you said about the difference when a white person gets killed and a Black person gets killed. There's a story in the New York Times today about ICE in Memphis, but because ICE in Memphis is almost singly gone after the Black and brown community in Memphis, we're not hearing very much about it. It's a great point. I also heard Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, talking this morning. He's a preacher too. He's a minister too, talking about, and even the Wall Street Journal mentioned this in their editorial, this is a crisis of morality here. And what's your take on that, Leslie?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that I wanted to bring in this conversation was Justine Damond, right? Justine Damond was killed in 2017, a white woman from South Minneapolis, right? And that was the first time in modern history that we saw a police officer held accountable in the state of Minnesota. And so one of the things, as we're talking about the hypocrisy and we're talking about the differences, is I will say, because I was one of the people who stood with South Minneapolis and helped to teach some of our neighbors who weren't as familiar with police brutality how to navigate this situation and how to organize, was that we really did band together like never before. And I would go to what Michael said, but the problem is people fall back asleep, right? What I will say is that this lays the foundation, because we are getting closer to creating a society that works for all. And the truth is that we just simply have not had a society that works for all. One other point that I really want to underscore, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Local news outlets, not just local news outlet, local people are being silenced on social media platforms. This happens every time an uprising or something happens. All of a sudden, our posts are not getting seen. On TikTok, I have 3 videos that say 0 views. I've never had 0 views before, right? And so they're literally suppressing. And I would tell people, my nonprofit is Win Back. We focus on activating community through holistic healing, economic empowerment, arts, and culture. And for the last 2 years, we've hosted an annual day of remembrance every year, because what we say is what you don't remember, you repeat. And so we're holding space on the ground, and we need people to support, right? We need people to support the work that's going on the ground, but it's kind of hard when people don't know what's going on the ground. And so I sent Michael some information earlier about what we're doing. So I would just tell people, really try to find local people and connect with them, because you're not going to see it all the time on major media outlets, because we're being suppressed even on social media.
By the way,
And,
it's
and
wait, before you go ahead, winbacknonprofit.com. Is that right? Do I have that right? Winback non
Winprofit.com, correct.
Great.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Michael.
no, I think I just want to underscore something Leslie shared, which is that this federal government is targeting folks, right? We're talking about audits. We're talking about there's the story of the woman who criticized what was happening in Minneapolis, and then they showed up at her shop and all of a sudden said that she was under audit to look at who she's hiring, right? Just because she was on the news criticizing this administration. Like, we are in that time. And I have to say this too, because in looking at the press coverage, Leslie, I couldn't help being a student of world history, thinking about the diary of Anne Frank, and the fear that immigrant communities have, hiding in their apartments, covering up windows, trying not to go out for food or to get their kids to school because they were afraid of being detained by mask-wearing law enforcement that won't even identify themselves. What time are we in? What moment are we in that we allow that in this country? Should be terrifying. I know Leslie's point is, we too, this too is America. We've always experienced this as Black folks. Now the rest of the world gets to see it live on television, the death, the brutality. What do we do with that awareness is what I'm hoping to ask the folks that I talk to.
Michael, can I
You know,
just
of
add to it just really
course.
quick? Because I think what you're
Sure.
saying is really important. And for everybody that doesn't have the benefit of hearing the stories, for instance, one of the places that we are buying space from and buying food from and holding space, she had a lot of immigrant workers. It's a Black owned establishment. And she had a lot of immigrant workers who told her, I can't risk coming to work. It's not worth it, right? I would rather not work than potentially be taken. I was in an Uber the other day, and it was a Latino brother. And I was asking him, how is he doing and X, Y, and Z. And he said, me and my family thankfully are good. But he said, my mom's so connected and she's telling me about all these stories where people are literally just afraid to leave their house. And I want people to think back to the Underground Railroad and a time where there was once illegal to help Black people try to flee from the South to the North. And I want people to know that Alex and Renee, they were courageous. They're standing on the right side of history. And it's important for all of us to try to stand on the right side of history, because this really is a moral reckoning that's happening.
Leslie, when I hope that everybody is nodding when you say standing on the right side of history. And I know I speak for Marjorie. When I turn on the TV at night and see you and your fellow Minneapolis residents and others standing out there in the freezing cold when I wouldn't
Yeah.
even go out to get a cheeseburger in that kind of weather, it is so inspiring. It's incredible. But aren't people scared? I mean, I know they're driven by their respect for their neighbors. And I can't tell you how much we all admire it. But it's
Oh,
got to be scary when you know that people die for doing just that, showing
you know,
up and demanding accountability.
not to cut you off, I was going to say people are terrified, right? And I will tell you, for me, this is not the first time. For me, the first time was in 2015 when white supremacist gunmen came down to the 4th precinct when we were occupying it in the dead of winter and shot multiple peaceful protesters. That was my first national interview on Democracy Now! Attorney General Keith Ellison, who was in Congress at the time, was sitting right beside me when I did the interview. Then I was scared again in 2020 when people were calling me about our community buildings were being burnt to the ground, kids were being chased, unarmed vehicles were in our neighborhoods, and I started to organize. We used Sammy's Avenue Eatery in North Minneapolis as a headquarter, and I was scared. I did not know if I was going to make it home.
So how do you deal with fear? How do you deal with fear?
So, really great question. One of my brands is don't complain, activate, right? And the idea is that we can all activate in some capacity. Now, I don't need everybody to be as courageous as me. I am a person that's on the front line. My parents are scared to get to death, okay? They wish I would just come and hide out in DC in my hometown with them. But I'm not a hider, right? Even though I'm afraid, I don't allow my fear to paralyze me. And I think that why so many people are coming out now is because they recognize that it could be them. I think a lot of people never thought it could be them, right? And now they're looking and they're saying, oh my goodness, this could be me. And so for me, what I tell people is learn from Alex and Renee. Don't let their life be in vain. Don't let them have lost their life for nothing, right? They lost their life standing up for justice. And so use some of their courageousness, use some of their encouragement, even if you don't have it. And what I would say for people who are believers, in the Bible specifically, it talks over and over about be not afraid, be courageous, because God knows we're going to be afraid. Being afraid is a part of it. You think David wasn't afraid when he was going up against Goliath? No, he was afraid. He just did not allow his fear to paralyze him. So I would say be afraid, but don't be paralyzed by your fear and still activate in spite of your fear.
I want to be
Jim,
you when I grow up, Leslie Redmond. I'll tell you right now. Go ahead,
I
Michael.
told
I'm
you,
sorry.
I told you she's an amazing young leader. Please, if you've not followed, watch Leslie Redmond. I think of her, I think about John Lewis. I think of Dr. King. I think of Diane Nash. She is a phenomenal young leader. Her words remind me when 1946, when the Martin Niemöller, I think his name, said, first they came for the socialists, I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. That is the moment we're in.
So, Michael, you mentioned a minute ago something we talk about on the radio almost every day, or at least our listeners do. What do we do about this? And you said exactly how I think we feel. It shouldn't just be people in Minneapolis and beyond in that state who care about exacting accountability for the killings of innocent, caring people. It should be everybody supporting that and standing up against this incredible, crass, sadistic behavior by the administration. How do we make that happen? I mean, it's happening in pockets. I know that, but the pockets are, in my opinion, too infrequent and too small. How does that change?
Yeah, I've said this before, and Leslie, I share this with you, that I'd love to tell people to vote. I'd love to tell them to write to your congressperson. I'd love to tell all those things they need to do. But I actually think that this war, and I'll call it a war, is won in the hearts and minds of people. So when I think about the Ecuadorian who thought that it was a conservative and voted for Trump, when I think about the Somalian a group who organized and did a press conference, Leslie, I think from Minnesota, that they were in favor of Trump's anti-immigrant policies. Where are they now? What he did is he weaponized people's prejudices. He tugged into the things that they seem to care about, and then they voted against their own interests. So the moment we're in now is, how do we now go back to those same communities, those same people, and say, now you need to pay attention. Now you need to be woke. And in fact, Leslie, they need to be insomniacs like you, not even just woke. They need to never go back to sleep, because now we need them to show up. But you got to start with information, with data, with science. And unfortunately, we've let people live in their ignorance, Leslie. That's why I love you so much, Leslie, is that you don't allow any of us to sleep.
Can I add to what you're saying? Because
You
I
may.
could agree with you more. I think that we talk to our base all the time, and we want to choir and we want to amen. And if you're fundraising, that's great. Amen. I hope some of y'all will donate. Okay. But we're not talking about fundraising right now. I agree with Michael. When I became the youngest president in the history of the Minneapolis NAACP at 25, I'm 33 now, I said that I wanted to help change the hearts and the minds of the masses, because I think that's the one thing that we've always got stuck at. We changed the policy, but we never helped change the people. And I think one of the things that we have to do is not be be so condescending. I tell stories all the time about my awakening and how I'm still becoming more woke every single day. It is a marathon, it's not a race. And because you arrived a little bit further or quicker than somebody else does not give you the right to be arrogant and to be snotty with them. No, I tell people all the time, redemption is for everybody. Everybody can be redeemed. And some of y'all need to be redeemed from this administration. And it's okay. And you know what? I would even say, maybe y'all can even convince y'all president to be redeemed, okay? Redemption, I believe, is not beyond anybody. If I was around, I would have been right in with Gandhi to Hitler, right? That is the type of leader that I am, right? And so, yes, I believe that there are people who made decisions and now they might be thinking different. And I'll tell you something, I do even think our president is able to shift, because if you look back at Renee Nicole Good, when she was originally murdered and killed, we'll say right now, technically, they were saying she was a domestic terrorist. They was calling her everything but a child of God. As soon as President Trump found out that her dad was a Trump supporter, his tone completely shifted. It shouldn't be like that, but let's not talk about what it should be. Let's talk about what it is, right? The truth is that he shifted and he said, you know what, this was a tragedy and I hope her dad is still a supporter. So you know what? The Trump supporters are actually who we need to be talking to, I believe.
Leslie
Leslie,
Redmond, you're entitled here
yeah,
anytime you want to be with us.
give me your website one more time before you go. It's win.
Yeah, so it is win, WIN, back, BACK, nonprofit.com. Win
Okay.
nonprofit.com.
Thank
Leslie, it
you
was a
so
pleasure
much
to hear your
for being
voice.
with us.
And
Michael,
Jim and Marjorie, I got to share this with you. So
What?
in 2017, me, the DC NAACP president, the Dallas president, and convinced the national NAACP to start a pipeline program for the baddest young leaders across the country to be the next civil rights leaders. No surprise, they approved it, and about 500 graduates have gone through. Leslie was top among them. When I tell you she is the next civil rights champion that we've been waiting for.